Yes. Okay, we are on New Testament Aleph. We are on 19a, and we are in the on scroll. It's 19a3. The last thing we said, we were trying to explain a Breita. We had a Breita, that the Breita said that Sal hayotze min Sukkah, that Succah hayotze min Sukkah, and the question is, what does it mean, hayotze min Sukkah? Good morning, Jaime.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Boker Tov. So we're on 19a3 on the right side, right column. Voshi Omer. The Gemara is offering different interpretations of the Breita. The Breita made a statement. It said that Succah that goes out from a sukkah has the status of a sukkah. Now, having a status of a sukkah is a very positive thing. That means it would be kosher. The question is, what does it mean? What does it mean that Succah goes out of the sukkah? So we had some interpretations yesterday. One interpretation is that the Succah, let's say you have the back wall, and the Succah protrudes outside the back wall. Let's say you have these long bamboo sticks, and the walls also extended, created another sukkah. That Succah could be used as a sukkah, as a second sukkah. But now we have a new interpretation. We're up to Reb Oshama. He says, "Lo nitzucha el Succah pasul pachot mishlosha b'sukkah katana." You have a small sukkah. What's a small sukkah? Let's say the bare minimum size sukkah is 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, which is, let's say, a tefach is between 3 and 4 inches. Let's say, we'll take the stricter end, 28 inches by 28 inches. And in that sukkah that you have 28, you have it's 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, but you have less than 3 tvachim that is not kosher Succah on that sukkah. Let's say you have some metal poles, which is not kosher Succah, on the sukkah. So you have, let's say, 4.5 kosher Succah and 2.5 not kosher Succah. So there's a big chidush here that we look at the not kosher Succah, that since it's such a small amount, it's less than 3 tvachim. So we look at it as if it's nullified by all the kosher Succah that's there. And since you have more than 4, you have less than 3 tvachim not kosher Succah, so it becomes nullified. So it's as if you have 7 tvachim. We consider it as that we look at it like you have 7. You have a proper Succah of 7 tvachim. So that's what the Gemara says. Now the Gemara says, "Umay yotze," and what does it mean yotze? That the Succah, the Succah goes out of the sukkah. What does it mean? It's going out of the sukkah. It's not Succah. It's just going. It's just you have some not kosher Succah here. You have less than 3 tvachim. Ma yotze mitorat sukkah. It means it goes out from the Torah sukkah. What does it mean? It goes out from the Torah sukkah. That it's a type of species that you use, this type of material that you use, that never had potential to be used as Succah. Never had that potential. Let's say metal, because it didn't grow from the ground. That type of item that even never had potential to be kosher Succah, still, if it's a small amount, less than 3 tvachim, becomes nullified, and you could be and you have a kosher sukkah. But if it's a 3 tvachim space, so 3 tvachim is significant, will not become batel, will not become nullified. As we know, as we've said before, that when you have less than 3 tvachim, it becomes joined together. If you have a space that's less than 3 tvachim, it's as if the space is closed. So we see less than 3 tvachim is significant. But when you have 3 tvachim space, a 3 tvachim space has not become closed, is considered significant. And therefore, if it's 3 tvachim of not kosher schach, it will not be nullified, and then you will not have, it's like as if you have 4 tvachim kosher schach, 3 tvachim not kosher schach, and you don't have the 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. So Maskif lo Rav Hoshia. Rav Hoshia has the following question. What is the chidush? What is the chidush, the novelty in this law? Lo yehei el aver. You know, not kosher schach. If you wanna, the strictest measurement we find the strictest situation. We're more strict by airspace than by not kosher schach. As we've learned, if you have not kosher schach, technically up to 4 tvachim and not including 4 tvachim and not kosher schach will not cut the sukkah in half. And technically, if you have less than 4 tvachim of not kosher schach, you would actually be able to sit under that space, technically, at least for that. The Ashkenazim would be machmir, they would not, maybe some Sfardim also would not sit on 3 tvachim or more of not between 3 and 4 tvachim. But at the end of the day, we found that to split a sukkah in half, if you remember, if we have not kosher schach running across the center of the sukkah, it has to be 4 tvachim wide to split the structure into 2. If you have airspace of 3 tvachim, less than 4 tvachim, 3 tvachim airspace wide going through the sukkah from one wall to from one end to the other, it would split the sukkah. So we were more strict by airspace, and the Taz explains airspace is more recognizable, and therefore we're going to be more strict when you have even 3 tvachim airspace. So the most strictest item that we're more strict is airspace, and even airspace where we're strict, the bar is lower. You have to meet 3 tvachim of airspace, and that will already knock the sukkah into 2 structures. Yet if you have less than 3 tvachim of airspace, we say it does not invalidate a sukkah. So if you have less than 3 tvachim of airspace, the sukkah is kosher. So certainly, if you have less than 3 tvachim of not kosher schach, the sukkah is kosher. So that's Rav Hoshia's question. Rav Hoshia says he doesn't want to accept that the interpretation of the Braita is telling us when you have less than 3 tvachim of not kosher schach, because that we should already know that law from the law that has to do with avir, of airspace. More than that in a bit. So that's Rav Hoshia's question. Lo yehei el avir, va'avir pachot mishlosh tvachim b'sukkah ketana mi posil. If you have airspace less than 3 tvachim in a small sukkah, let's say you have a 7 tefach sukkah, 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. We are on Yutet Amanaf, 19A3, the right side. If you have a small sukkah, let's say you have a sukkah 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, but the airspace is less than 3 tvachim, right? You left space in the ceiling of the sukkah and the schach. The space is less than 3 tvachim. We look at it as if it's sealed. We look at it as if the schach kosher extends. So if we look at airspace, which in general we're more stringent by airspace, if we look at if you have a gap less than 3 tvachim, it is considered closed. So certainly we'll have that same law when it comes to not kosher schach, because we're more lenient by not kosher schach. But you need 4 tvachim of not kosher schach to invalidate a sukkah. So that's the question that he is. Amalei Reb Abba. So Reb Abba responds to Rav Hoshia. He says that there's something unique about this halacha more than the law of there's some chidush here that's different than the law of airspace. Zeh mitzdaref, the Braita is coming to teach you not only if you have airspace less than 3 tvach, if you have schach pasul less than 3 tvachim. Let's say you have metal pole less than 3 tvachim in this small sukkah. Not only is it a kosher sukkah, but you can even sit under the metal poles. That is the chidush. Zeh mitzaref the nakosh schach joins, since it's small amount, less than 3 tvachim becomes nullified by the rest, and therefore it's considered nullified as if we look at it as if the 4 tefach, little over 4 tvachim of schach, mevatel, it knocks out the nakosh schach. Zeh mitzaref v'yeshenim. You can actually sit under these metal poles if it's less than 3 tvachim. However, when it comes to airspace, this is mitzaref v'ein yeshenim tachta. And when you have less than 3 tvachim of airspace, we're more strict. In what way? You can't sleep under that space. If you have a space, and the commentaries explain, the Shulchan Aruch says, what does that mean? If the airspace runs from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, in that case, we will not sleep under that airspace, or even if the airspace doesn't run from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, if most of your head, if somehow you could get most of your head underneath it, maybe you're on a slant or some way configuration that you have less than 3 tvachim of an open space, and your head fits underneath there, then you will not be able to sleep under that space. So it's interesting, and that's in Shulchan Aruch, it talks about. Now, see, it talks about this halacha. So that's a unique thing that we need to be careful about a sukkah. What will come out, you have to be very careful. You shouldn't have a space, an empty space in your sukkah that goes from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah. And it's not filled with schach. Because then, from our Gemara, it says that if you have less than 3 tvachim, and the way the commentaries learn, and it goes from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, of empty airspace, you can't, even though it does not invalidate the sukkah, it doesn't split the sukkah in half. I mean, to make it into 2 structures, only if you have 3 tvachim, but if you have less than 3 tvachim, you can't sleep under that space. So therefore, it's recommended, some people, what they do is, they run the schach in 2 different directions, right? We spoke about it, right? So if you run the schach, if you run the schach from this side, let's say if you run it this way, and then you run the schach the other way, perpendicular, or at least at one point of the sukkah, you place certain schach that it goes the other direction. So therefore, there will never be empty space running from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah. We're making sure we have more shade than sun. I mean, the main thing is we saw that you should be able, it's the idea of being able to see more of the stars that you can see through. There's always, unless you put a tremendous amount of schach that is so heavy.
So right now the argument is
if you have 3 tvachim of airspace, that would split. No, 3 tvachim of airspace, there's going to be 2 issues with 3 tvachim airspace. Number one, you can't sit under that. And number 2 is 3 tvachim of airspace has if it goes from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, it will actually split the structure in half. And then depending how many walls you began, if you only began with 3 walls, then the sukkah is no good. If you have 3 tvachim airspace. But if you have a 7 by 7 tvachim, one assignment sukkah, if there's 3 tvachim of metal, so the 3 tvachim of metal is a significant amount. and therefore will not become nullified. It's true. You have four tvachim, right? But if you have three tvachim of not kosher schach, the problem there is we don't look at it as if you have 7 tvachim schach, because the 3 tvachim not kosher schach is considered significant. It holds its own space. So then you're left with, it's true. 3 tvachim schach of metal will not cut the sukkah in half. 3 tvachim empty space cuts the sukkah in half. But 3 tvachim not kosher schach retains its identity of not kosher schach. And then but even if you have you would have to have 7 left. Meaning if you would have a sukkah of 10 tvachim of sukkah, schach 7 kosher, 3 metal, so then that would be a good sukkah. And in halacha, there'll be a discussion in such a sukkah if you can actually sit under that 3 tvachim metal, because it's not a 4 tefach metal. You hear what I'm saying? So the Ashkenazim will not sit under that, and that will be a discussion. And for Sfardim, it's more ideal also not to sit under such a thing. But our Gemara is talking now, if you have less than 3 tvachim of airspace, or less than 3 tvachim, morning, Mrs. Silverman, less than 3 tvachim of airspace, or less than 3 tvachim of not kosher schach, so the Gemara says the sukkah is good. The sukkah is kosher, but we still have a difference between the empty airspace and the what? And the not kosher schach. And the difference will be in whether I could sit under that less than 3 tvachim of empty airspace or less than 3 tvachim of not kosher schach. And the Gemara says that we're going to be more strict when it comes to empty airspace. I cannot sit under empty airspace. I can't sit, I can't sleep, I can't eat on the empty airspace if it's less than 3 tvachim and it goes from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah. I have two, according to the Gemara, it would sound like some actually take it literally. If I would have 2 inches or an inch, some take it, any of airspace that goes from one end of the sukkah that you could see, here's an empty space. There's no schach from this side all the way to the end. I can't sit under that. I can't sleep under that. That would be one situation. I can't sleep under that empty airspace. Or even if the empty airspace does not go from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, but at any spot in the sukkah, there's a spot that my empty airspace, that my head fits under it. Even if it's less than 3 tvachim, you have to figure out how that would be. I can't sit on that spot. But the Gemara jumps on this, and the Gemara says, so that's what the Gemara says. Now we are on 19A3. So the Gemara said, the bottom, midi. You're telling me that this item, this terufim mitzaref, that you're telling me when you have less than 3 tvachim of not kosher schach, less than 3 tvachim of airspace, it joins to make it still a kosher sukkah, because you're telling me less than 3 tvachim is considered like lavud, it's considered closed. So if you have an empty airspace of less than 3 tvachim, let's say running from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, you told me that it's still a kosher sukkah, but v'hu atzmo ain't a kosher. But yet you're telling me the sukkah is good, but I can't, it joins for the sukkah, but I can't sleep under that spot. I can't sleep under that spot. It seems, if it's good, if the empty airspace is considered fine, and it doesn't, and it's joined for the sukkah, so if it joins for the sukkah, so then why shouldn't I be able to sleep underneath it? How could you, you're going in 2 different directions. You're telling me it's kosher, it joins the empty airspace. Imagine you have this You have 2 tefach empty airspace in the sukkah. You're telling me it joins, it's kosher, the sukkah's kosher. You've met the measurements of a sukkah, but yet you tell me I can't sleep under that spot. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak ben Eliyashiv. So again, so the Gemara is holding at this point, the chidush is, if you look at the bottom Rashi, the last Rashi on the page, Amar le Rav Abba. Have the last Rashi on the page? Rashi says, Amar le Rav Lahachi ahani nidon kesukah. This is why it helps, the chidush, the novelty that this schach that's not kosher has the status of a sukkah. Lashmi'ina Tana, the Tana is teaching you Loma sheyeshenim tachtav. You could sleep under this not kosher schach that's less than 3 tvachim. Te'ilu avi pochot mishlosha. If you have empty space less than 3 tvachim, mitztareif lehashlim l'shia sukkah. Less than 3 tvachim could be used to complete the size of a sukkah that now I have a 7x7 sukkah with schach. Even though I only have little over 4 tvachim of kosher schach, but I have empty space of 2 3/4, it's still kosher. But I can't sleep under that empty space. So the Gemara says, where do we have such a phenomenon? You tell me the empty space is considered like kosher for the sukkah. It completes the size of the sukkah, but you can't sleep underneath. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak ben Eliyashiv, the famous Rabbi Eliyashiv in Eretz Yisrael. Here we have the name of Eliyashiv. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak ben Eliyashiv, not so common name in the Gemara. Yes, we found a precedent. Now we're turning the page, everybody. What's the precedent? We have Tid hanorot yochiach. If you have mud that's liquid enough, it's liquidy enough. Let's say you had water went onto the ground, we created this muddy material. So it's liquid, but it's liquid mixed with dirt. But it is liquid enough that you can actually pour it from one utensil to another utensil. It's soft mud. They call it pourable mud that can be poured from one utensil to another. So it has it's mostly liquid. So this is mostly liquid and it's water. It could be used to as part of the 40 sa'ah. It could be, you need the size of a mikveh, needs to be the size of 40 sa'ah. So let's say it rained in a certain spot, and if you created this, you dug a ditch in the ground, and it rained in a certain spot. So and now because you need to have a certain size of a certain amount of space filled with water, which is a space that you could fulfill with 40 sa'ah. It's a certain measurement of water that needs to be filled in this hole in the ground in order for it to be considered a kosher mikveh.
It's like Rabbi. It's like 3 by 3, 3 or 4 by. It's a size.
It's a large space. 40 sa'ah is a large space because that as we see, a mikveh is not a small little. It's a certain area that has to be to fill in
40 sa'ah. 40 sa'ah.
40 sa'ah.
And it has to be natural water the first time. The first time it needs to be natural water the first time. After that, you can plug water in.
Right. Once you have a kosher sukkah of 40 sa'ah, then you can add water to that sukkah. And then we say adding because generally you can't draw water and pour into a sukkah. But if once you have a kosher sukkah 40 sa'ah, then you could pour water in, and we say all that water that you're pouring in becomes nullified, becomes batel into that sukkah. Correct. But let's say you're making the kosher sukkah. kosher mikveh, and you have and the water goes into the ground, and a certain amount of this mikveh is now contained is muddy. The certain amount of this mikveh water is muddy. So we say
there's halachot regarding that. If you can't see through the water, it's not good.
Okay, so we have to, but here the Gemara we have to see this. We have to look into those halachas of mikveh. But here the Gemara is saying that we could count. Let's say you have 10 sa'ah of this mikveh out of the 40 is this muddy water. Can you join? Do we count when we count the 40 sa'ah? Does this 10 sa'ah that's muddy part of the calculation of the 40 sa'ah, or do we say no? That it's no good? So we say shemitzaref la'abam sa'ah. It joins to the 40 sa'ah, and we say that you could go into that mikveh that has a certain amount of the water that is this muddy water. However, v'hatovo bo. If you go ahead, the way Rashi learns, if you go into a mikveh that's completely muddy, a muddy mikveh that's completely muddy, that mikveh will not be kosher. So we see it will not help. So we see this. No, but the contrast is right. If it's partially muddy, it's fine. But if it's totally muddy, because right. So Rashi said right. So look at the Rashi. Look at the Rashi on top. Look at the Rashi on the page. Rashi is the one who fills in the blank. Look at the top left corner of Rashi. Titanoro yochiach. The Rashi says, pourable mud proves it. A type of, if it's a certain level of mud that you could go in and pour it from one utensil to another, it's soft. Rashi says lahashlim. It could join to complete shir memsa. It could join to fill the size of 40 sa'ah. But v'hatovel bo. But if you dip in it, so Rashi says b'mem sa'ah shakula titnaro. If you dip in 40 sa'ah that is completely muddy, that's how Rashi learns. Completely muddy, lo alta lotri. Then it will not join in to be partially muddy. Could be exactly. So I gave an example. Let's say 10 or 30. See, it's not clear from Rashi. Rashi says if the whole thing is muddy, is a problem. What did you say? Rashi says if the whole thing is muddy,
because he's going to go in and take out the water with him, the mud, and it's going to be less than 40 sa'ah.
But the Gemara, it doesn't seem that the concern of the Gemara is that you're making it less than 40 sa'ah. The concern of the issue of the Gemara seems that if the mikveh is 40 sa'ah, even if it will retain the 40 sa'ah, if it's totally muddy, if it's made up of this totally muddy water, it will not be good for a mikveh. Okay, we'll have to get to that. Okay, so that is the so the Gemara says, so we found this, that the Gemara wants to compare the same to our airspace. The airspace itself, if you would, it could join the rest of the sukkah, the empty airspace, and you could say it joins to the shear. It makes up the size. Let's say we said if you have a sukkah that's 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, and you have an empty airspace of less than 3 tvachim, we could say that empty airspace, as long as it's less than 3 tvachim, then it could join to create the size of a kosher sukkah. just like that mud, the water could join, could be part of other water that's not muddy. But when it comes to using it, but you can't go ahead and dip this. You can't, the same way you can't dip only in muddy water, so too you wouldn't be able to go ahead and sit under the space that's the empty space. The empty.
The
Okay, so that's good. So what's the weakness in the analogy? Right. You hear what the weakness in the analogy is that when it comes, you see here the Gemara is in the empty water, when in the muddy water, we say you could use, we find when it's mixed together, you could go ahead. We never found when it's mixed together that there's any issue. When it's mixed together, we say you could it makes the size of 40 sa, and you actually dip in that mixing of water. So, and same thing by Sukkah. Sukkah, if once it fits the size of the Sukkah, you should be able to sit underneath that spot. You're comparing it to a case. You're saying in a case by a Sukkah, when it's less than 3 tvachim, you're saying it's not going to, it's kosher, it makes the size, but you can't sit underneath. Where do you see you can't, if it's kosher, it makes the size, meaning by the morning, Mr. Feldman, when it comes to the muddy water, good morning, good to see him, son. When it comes to the muddy water, we never found, once it serves to join the size of the mikvah, we never found a problem. We say everything is fine. The only time we find a problem is when the total thing is muddy water. So tomorrow we'll have to get into how to address this question on Rashi. But Rashi learns the Gemara's comparison is that the mikvah that has a certain amount of water that's muddy, and the rest of the water that's not muddy, that it's kosher for a mikvah. But if the whole thing is muddy, you cannot go into that all the waters are muddy, you can't use as a mikvah. And when it comes to a sukkah, similarly, if there's an empty space in the schach, we have to be very careful about empty spaces in the ceiling. If you have an empty space less than 3 tvachim, if it's less than 9 to 12 inches wide, it will not invalidate the sukkah. The sukkah will still be good, but nevertheless, you cannot sit under an empty space in a sukkah if it goes from one end of the sukkah to another end of the sukkah. So therefore, you have to be careful to have proper schach. Now the next Mishnah talks about when you make your sukkah, the question is, you have to be able to have a very clear roof to your sukkah in order for a sukkah to be kosher. Or let's say you make a sukkah in a way that you don't really have a clear roof. You make a sukkah like on a slopey type of, what do you call this? Something called a teapot? What do you call this? Teepee. You make a teepee, and you don't really see the roof on the teepee. Would that be a kosher sukkah or not? Let's say you made it 10 tvachim high, right? You have the height, and you have and the area inside is also 7 tvachim by 7. There's a certain minimal area of a sukkah and a certain minimal height of the walls. So let's say you met that, but the problem was you can't see where is the wall and where is the roof. It goes
a bed. In other words, what if there's something blocking it? A bed.
Right. So the question is that a kosher sukkah or that's not a kosher sukkah? Do you have to be able to see, to discern what's the wall and what's the roof or not? Yes. If you have 3 tvachim, right? That one, the sukkah won't be.
regular kosher stuff.
Right. If you have four kosher schach, 4 tvachim, it won't be kosher. If you it will not be kosher. It has to be less. If you have less than 3 tvachim of non-kosher material, then the sukkah would be kosher. But if only if it's less than 3. Less than 3 tvachim. In a small sukkah, right. But if it be 3 tvachim, if you the idea is we said that 3 tefach is considered significant. 3 tvachim, by the way, the size of hadassim and the size of a ravot, right? Sukkah is coming. There's a certain minimum height that you have to have the size that you can't make a cut the willow, cut that ravot. I got a very short a midget arava doesn't work. A midget hadas doesn't work. What is the minimum size for your hadas and the aravot? 3 tvachim. How do you like that? So 3 tvachim becomes like is we find this precedent that's called something of significance. You got something there. 3 tvachim. Now what's called 3 tvachim? 3 tvachim is about 9 to 12 inches. So I think Rav Moshe says, I think for hadassim, aravot, it should be, I think, 11 inches. He calls it maybe his size will be, let's say, about 11 inches. If it should be about, I think that's what he goes with. 11 inches, you should be careful to make sure. So when you cut, if you have your own aravo tree, your own willow tree, and you're cutting them, always cut it longer than shorter. Because if you cut it too short, Mr. Feldman, it might be too, you might not have the right size. So you can't go wrong when you go ahead and you cut it when you have the long aravo. You could go bad when you caught it too short. So we find there also 3 tvachim. So therefore, that's the same thing. If you have airspace, the size, if you make believe, if you would have that size airspace in your sukkah of that 11-inch, that arava going wide, and if it goes all the way from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, that has the ability to split your sukkah. Imagine this is the arava, and here's the arava. Let's say the arava is usually this pointy, but now I placed the size of this arava 11 inches, or maybe even a little less, goes across. I have my sukkah 11 inches empty space from one end of the sukkah to the other. So we say that empty space has the ability to split the structure into 2. We don't look at it as you have one sukkah. We look at it now, you have like 2 separate sukkot. And then the question is, are you left with 3 walls on each side? Or you might be only left with 2 walls on each side. It might not be a kosher sukkah. So you got to be careful. You don't leave these. In order for this empty space to invalidate, to split the sukkah in half, you have to go from one end to the other end. But if it's in one spot,
like a skylight,
you won't be able to sit under that spot. If you have a nice empty spot in
skylight.
your sukkah, you don't sit under that. You don't eat under that empty spot. Yes.
I said like a skylight. It's not going to be with no skach over it.
Right, exactly.
You're saying it's going to split your sukkah, so
if you create a skylight in a sukkah, you have like a size of a skylight in the sukkah open. You can't sit under that skylight.
Technically,
it's too much empty space.
You can make levud, put poles around.
But levud, again, if it's too big, levud is only up to 3 tvachim.
I know. So if I put one pole, another pole, and I could fill it in and make it a wall.
Right. Depending how a skylight is a nice opening. It's a nice opening.
You said 11 inches. It could be 11 inches. It could be 10 inches. It could be 2 feet if you wanted. Whatever you like.
I would say, Mr. Michael, I would say we should be more strict when it comes to, if let's say we say 3 tvachim is between 9 and 12 inches. So I would say, so sometimes being strict is by considering it 9 inches. Sometimes being strict is by considering it 12 inches. So if we want to be really strict by the hadassim and the aravot, we will use a 12-inch arava hadas. And if we want, because that's the more strict size. And if we want to be more strict when it comes to problem sitting in the sukkah, so then we would take it as 9 inches would split the sukkah in half if we're going to be strict on that end. Okay, the bottom line is we're getting ready to pray, but the bottom line is we got to be careful when we have a sukkah, make sure we have nice schach, have extra schach in the sukkah, everybody. Also,
a solid run.
Right. So that's going to be a machloket in the Mishnah. Yeah, Machlok in the Mishnah, whether such a sukkah is good when you don't see the wall, when you don't clearly identify the wall and the teepee. You don't identify the wall. So the halacha follows the chachamim that it would be invalid if there's no clear identification. But if you have, let's say, a tefach, if you would have some sort of, even a small amount, that you're able to see the roof, then it would be a kosher sukkah. It has to be like a tefach, at least a tefach of a roof. Yeah, it's hard to build such a thing. Okay, I want to wish everyone a beautiful day. It's great to have everybody back.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I mean, welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome. All the
Have a
best.
good day.
Take care, Mr.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. You too.